Hi everyone. Welcome to the continuation of lectures on civil procedure. We will now discuss execution of judgments under Rule 39. Okay, there are two ways by which um, a final and executory judgment can be executed. Okay, the first one is through motion, and the second one is through a revival of judgment. Okay. You know that execution uh, is the fruit of the litigation. So it becomes a matter of right once there is already a final and executory decision issued by the trial court or the appellate court. Okay, so when the litigant secures a winning decision and the opposing party did not appeal the decision, okay, then that decision will become final. And the prevailing party can file a motion to execute the decision. Both the motion for execution as well as the writ of execution should be implemented within the same 5-year period from the date of finality of judgment. If the motion was filed within the said 5-year period, but it was not implemented within the same period, then the court loses jurisdiction over but the writ of execution, I mean, was not issued within the same period, then the court loses jurisdiction over the uh, issuance of a writ of execution to a motion. Okay, under Section 1 of Rule 39, execution shall issue as a matter of right on motion upon judgment or order that disposes of the action or proceeding upon the expiration of the period to appeal, if no appeal has been duly perfected. If the appeal has been perfected and finally resolved, the execution may be applied for in the court of origin of the judgment obliging, submitting the certified true copies of the judgment or judgments or final order sought to be enforced, and the entry thereof with notice to the adverse party. So, as a general rule, you file the motion with the trial court, the court which rendered the judgment. If it is appealed, okay, you still file it and the decision of the appellate court became final, you still file it with the trial court. However, in certain instances, it may be filed in the appellate court and the motion may be filed with the appellate court, and in the interest of when the interest of justice requires, um, the appellate court may issue an order or a ruling on the motion directing the court of origin to issue the writ of execution. Okay. Now, it is important to note that execution is a matter of right. When execution is a matter of right, it may be made by motion filed in the court of origin. Okay? Once the decision becomes final and there is already an entry of judgment, the prevailing party may reap the fruits of his victory by filing a motion for execution of the decision. Okay, as we have discussed, when we were discussing judgments, a decision that has already attained finality becomes immutable. And therefore, the prevailing party is entitled, okay, to its implementation. Okay. Now, if, for example, the judgment is appealed and there is already a decision by the appellate court, then the prevailing party is also entitled to the implementation of the judgment by filing the appropriate motion in the trial court or in certain cases with the appellate court. But it is just the same. It is still the trial court who will issue the writ of execution. Okay. Um, how about when the decision is not yet final? Can you move for execution? Okay. The answer is yes, but the same is discretionary and not a matter of right. Unlike in final and executory judgment, okay, wherein execution is a matter of right, okay, when a decision is still on appeal, okay, the execution may be ordered subject to the discretion of the trial court, okay, or the appellate court as the case may be. Okay. Now, when the records are still with the trial court, then you can file the motion for execution pending appeal with the trial court because the trial court still has jurisdiction over the case. You call that residual jurisdiction. But once the records are already elevated to the appellate court, the court loses, the trial court loses its residual jurisdiction and any motion, okay, for execution pending appeal must be filed with the appellate court. So what does Section 2 of Rule 39 say? On motion of the prevailing party, with notice to the adverse party filed in the trial court while it has jurisdiction over the case, as in is in possession of either the original record or the record on appeal, may, at the time of the filing of the motion, said court may in its discretion order execution of judgment or final order even before the expiration of the period to appeal. After the trial court has lost jurisdiction, the motion for execution pending appeal may be filed in the appellate court. Discretionary execution may only issue upon good reasons to be stated in a special order after due hearing. So what does Section 2 tell us? Okay, if you are the prevailing party in a decision rendered by the trial court, and the opposing party filed an appeal, you're not yet entitled to execution as a matter of right. But, okay, you can file a motion for execution pending appeal. When do you file it? You file it within the period to appeal and while the records are still with the trial court. Okay, so what do you allege in the motion? You allege in the motion the good reasons why you are entitled to the issuance of a writ of execution pending appeal and you notify the adverse party. Normally, the set motion for execution pending appeal will be set for hearing and the other party will be given the chance to comment or oppose the said motion. Okay. Now, there is also execution of several separate or partial judgments. So if, for example, there are several defendants, okay, and they have separate defenses, and there is already a judgment rendered by the trial court, some of the defendants appealed, some chose not to appeal. So with respect to those which have not yet appealed, you can already file a motion for execution as a matter of right. With respect to those who decided to appeal or who filed an appeal, okay, you can file a motion for execution pending appeal. Several separate or partial judgment may be executed under the same terms and conditions as execution of a judgment or final order pending. Okay, we go to the case of Archinet International versus Beck. So in this case, Beko Max engaged the services of Beko as a contractor for the construction of a building. Now, Beko entered into contracts with several subcontractors, one of which was Archinet, who is the petitioner in this case, who is engaged in providing architectural and interior design services. However, Beko failed to make timely payments, okay, to Archinet. Now, Archinet decided to file a case for breach of contract, sum of money, and damages against Beko. Now, the trial court rendered judgment in favor of Archinet. And the said decision, petitioners filed a motion for discretionary execution, alleging that there are good reasons because Becomax is in imminent danger of insolvency. Now, the issue is whether the trial court committed grave abuse of discretion in allowing execution pending appeal. Remember that the good reason cited by Archinet is that Becomax is in danger of becoming insolvent. Okay, in the case of Manaco, the Supreme Court held that discretionary execution may be allowed upon concurrence of the following requisites. First, there must be a motion with notice to the adverse party. Second, there must be a good reason for execution pending appeal. And third, the good reason must be stated in a special order. So motion, good reason, and a special order. Okay, citing the good reason. A good what constitutes a good reason? According to the Archinet case, good reasons consist of compelling circumstances justifying immediate implementation of judgment. Otherwise, the judgment becomes illusory. Execution of a judgment pending appeal is an exception to the general rule that only a final judgment may be executed. Thus, the existence of good reasons is essential, for it is what confers discretionary power on a court to issue a writ of execution pending. It bears stressing that imminent danger of insolvency of the defeated party has been held to be a good reason to justify discretionary execution. So as a general rule, execution is only allowed if the judgment is already final. However, during the pendency of an appeal, discretionary execution may be ordered or issued upon the discretion of the court. So how will the court exercise its discretion? It will exercise its discretion by determining whether or not a good reason exists to justify discretionary execution. In other words, the implementation of the judgment is urgently needed to prevent the winning party from holding an empty bag, so to speak. Okay? We now go to the case of Harbor Center versus Aquino. So in this case, La Filipina and Harbor Center executed a MOA, okay, of their rights and obligations, particularly on berthing and dredging, port cargo and handling services. So Harbor Center will regularly dredge the navigational channel and berthing area. However, several of La Filipinas vessels touched bottom. So La Filipina filed a complaint in the RTC for failure of harbor to comply with the MOA. La Filipino argued that Harbor Center failed to dredge regularly and maintain the required depth of its navigational channel and berthing area, which caused several of its vessels to sink. Now, Harbor Center filed a notice of appeal. La Filipina filed a motion for partial execution pending appeal to dredge the navigational channel and berthing area to a depth of 11.5 meters. Now, the issue is whether or not the grant of the motion for partial execution pending appeal was valid. Okay, the Supreme Court held that um, the court partially granted the motion for partial execution pending appeal and issued the writ of execution as to the immediate dredging of the navigation channel and berthing area. As a general rule, the execution of a judgment is allowed only when it has become final and executory. This arises in the following cases: when the right to appeal has been renounced or waived, when the period for appeal has lapsed without an appeal having been taken, or the appeal has been resolved and the records of the case have been returned to the court of origin. So in these cases, execution will issue as a matter of right. Now, the discretionary execution pending appeal has two requirements. First, the jurisdictional requirement, which relates to when and where it can be filed, and the grounds for its issue. A motion for execution pending appeal may be filed before the RTC while it still has jurisdiction over the case, as is still in possession of the original record or the record on appeal at the time the motion is filed. As to the granting of the execution pending appeal, okay, the following are the requirements. Okay, first, the prevailing party must file a motion. Second, there must be a good reason. And third, the good reason must be stated in a special order after hearing. Now, if execution pending appeal is granted, the appeal shall still continue. If the appeal is granted, such that the judgment executed is reversed or annulled, the trial court may order restitution or reparation of damages, taking into consideration justice and equity. Now, the court again reiterates that what is most essential for the grant of execution pending appeal is the existence of good reason. Jurisprudence has established guidelines to determine what constitutes a good reason for the grant of execution pending appeal. So in Villamor versus Napocor, the court held that there must be a compelling circumstance to justify the grant of execution pending appeal. It must be shown that if the motion is denied, then the judgment will be rendered useless. Perhaps the prevailing party will be unable to enjoy the award granted because of delay caused by the other party's appeal. There must be an urgency in the superior circumstances, and it must outweigh the damage that will be caused to the losing party in case the latter's appeal is granted. Also, in the same case of Harbor, it cited PBCOM versus CA, wherein there is an enumeration of what may constitute good reasons for the grant of execution pending appeal. Okay? First, when in an intestate proceeding which has been pending for almost 29 years, one group of heirs has not yet received the inheritance due them when the others have already received theirs. Okay, second is the advanced age of the prevailing party. So if um, one of the prevailing party is already of age or of advanced age, that he will not be able to enjoy the fruits of his victory if uh, he, he, he or she will still await the resolution of the appeal. Okay, third, when the defeated party is in imminent danger of insolvency. Fourth, when the appeal is dilatory and the losing party intends to encumber or dispose of the property subject of the case during the pendency of the appeal. And fifth, when there is a deterioration of commodities subject to litigation. In Geologist versus Gateway, the admission of liability does not automatically mean that a good reason exists, considering that the amount due is still being contested in the appeal. Okay, also, the posting of a bond does not justify the issuance of execution pending appeal. Okay, there must be a combination of circumstances that impels its grant, such that the bond is not the only reason for its issue. So, as I've said, there are three requisites. First, filing of a motion. Second is good reason. Third is a special order stating the good reason after a hit. And then you file a bond. Now, a bond, okay, will not dispense of the good reason. So the concurrence of good reason plus bond is required to stay execution pending. So also the court elaborated that good reason is not just any reason. Okay, it is synonymous to equitable consideration. Okay, to ensure that the judgment creditor would be able to enjoy the fruits of the trial court's decision, but also because there are good policy reasons such as fairness or public benefit. Second, whether the immediate execution of a portion or all of the judgment is more equitable to the judgment creditor or the public in general as compared with a final rule on the. So in this case, the court found that the immediate execution of the order to dredge is justified. This court sees the good reason behind immediately ordering the dredging. Respondent would incur serious costs if dredging is delayed, and the insufficient depth of the berthing area can place vessels at risk, which in turn can put at risk the value of the cargo. We now move to the case of JP Latex versus Balance Grandeur. So in this case, JP Latex and Grandeur entered into a contract of sale for the sale of Grandeur's equipment. However, Grandeur paid only a partial sum. Thus, JP sued Grandeur. The RTC rendered a decision in favor of Grandeur. Now, while the case was pending, Grandeur moved for the execution pending appeal. Petitioner filed a motion for reconsideration of the decision. Okay, now the issue is whether the execution pending appeal may be issued and implemented when the decision sought to be executed is not yet final because of the pending and unresolved motion for recon of the decision sought to be executed pending appeal. Okay, the time for filing of a discretionary execution is the period, okay, during which the records are still with the trial court, and um, there is already an appeal. Okay, so the decision is not yet final and executory because there is an appeal. But what if there is still a pending incident, such as a motion for reconsideration that is still unresolved by the trial court? Will dependency of the said motion for reconsideration, okay, affect the motion for execution pending appeal? So the Supreme Court said discretionary execution is allowed only when the period to appeal has commenced, but before the trial court loses jurisdiction over the case. The period to appeal, where a motion for reconsideration has been filed, commences only upon the receipt of a copy of the order disposing of the motion for reconsideration. So it is that 15-day period, okay, from receipt of the judgment, okay, or from receipt of the denial of the motion for reconsideration. So that is the period within which to file a motion for execution pending appeal. The Supreme Court further said that the pendency of an MR prevents the running of the period to appeal because there is still an unresolved incident, which is the motion for recall. So the trial court still has to resolve the MR before the period to appeal commences. So, uh, if the MR is still unresolved, you still cannot move for execution pending appeal. Petitioner filed a motion for reconsideration of the decision. The motion has not yet been acted upon by the RTC before it ruled on the motion for execution pending appeal. So the pendency of the motion for reconsideration has prevented the period to appeal from even commencing. The period within which a party may move for execution pending appeal of the trial court's decision has not yet also started. When there is a pending motion for reconsideration of the RTC decision, an order of execution pending appeal is improper and premature. So in the absence of an appeal from the decision, as the motion for reconsideration is still unresolved, the execution ordered by the RTC cannot be properly considered as execution pending. Okay, we now move to the case of Fortune Guarantee versus Court of Appeals. So in this case, Iselco One secured a fire insurance policy from Fortune, okay, to ensure its distribution facilities. Now, during the subsistence of the insurance policy, the insured properties of Iselco One were destroyed by two typhoons. Now, the petitioner, however, Fortune Guarantee, refused to pay the claims despite demand. Now, Iselco One filed a case for collection of sum of money. A judgment was rendered in favor of Iselco One. Now, Iselco One filed a motion for execution pending appeal. Again, the court found the occasion to reiterate the requisites for the grant of a motion for execution pending appeal. A motion, good reason, and special order stating the good reason after the conduct of a hearing. Again, the court reiterated that being an exception to the general rule, the requisites of execution pending appeal must be strictly construed. We have consistently held that good reason must constitute superior circumstances demanding urgency, which will outweigh the injury or damage if the losing party secures a reversal of the judgment. What these good reasons are must necessarily be addressed to the sound discretion of the court. So in this case, the Supreme Court held that the respondent judge exercised sound discretion in granting execution pending appeal on the ground that Iselco One is a cooperative of the people and that it is engaged in the business of retailing electricity. To deliver electricity to the people, its electric lines, poles, etc., must always be maintained in good order and condition. So the payment, the insurance claim is proper. We now go to supervening event. Okay, supervening event is another exception to the doctrine of immutability of final judgment. Even if the judgment has already become final and executory, still it would be inequitable to enforce the judgment. A supervening event consists of facts that transpire after the judgment became final and executory or of new circumstances that develop after the judgment attained finality, including matters that the parties were not aware of prior to or during the trial because such matters were not yet existing at that time. So in such an event, in case of supervening event, the interested party may properly seek the stay of execution or the quashal of the writ of execution, or he may move the court to modify or alter the judgment in order to harmonize it with justice and the supervening event. The party who alleges a supervening event to stay the execution should necessarily establish the facts by competent evidence. Okay, in order to claim supervening event as a ground for the quashal of the writ of execution, there are two requisites. First, the fact or circumstance must occur after the judgment became final. Second, the fact or circumstance must be shown to affect or change the judgment substance, making its execution inequitable. So if, for example, the fact alluded to as a supervening event actually existed even before the judgment already became final, then the first requisite is not met. Or if, for example, it would not, the alleged supervening event would not change the judgment, making it execution inequitable, then it did not satisfy the second required. So in the case of, let us now go to the case of Abrigo versus Flores. So in this case, the dispositive portion of the decision directed the partition of a parcel of land between the heirs of Francisco and Gaudentia. Okay, with the former getting the western half and the latter the eastern half. And the latter was also ordered to remove the improvements encroaching the western portion. So the decision became final after it was affirmed by the Court of Appeals. Now, the RTC issued several writs to enforce the judgment. Petitioners could not import into the action for partition of the property their demand for the segregation of the one-fourth share of Jimmy. Instead, their correct course of action was to initiate the proper proceeding for the partition of the western portion based on the supposed sale to them by Jimmy. A supervening event is an exception to execution as a matter of right of a final and immutable judgment only if it directly affects the matter already litigated and settled or substantially changes the rights or relations of the parties as to render the execution unjust, impossible, or inequitable. However, the sale by Jimmy of his one-fourth share in the western portion, assuming it to be true, did not modify or alter the judgment regarding the partition of the. So in other words, it did not change the tenor of the judgment, making execution inequitable. So the second requisite was not satisfied. We now go to the case of Holy Trinity versus Abac. So in this case, Holy Trinity Realty Corporation acquired properties from Santiago. But Holy Trinity found out later that the property was occupied by the spouses Abacan. So Holy Trinity filed a complaint for unlawful detainer and damages against Abacan. Now the trial court decided in favor of Holy Trinity. The decision became final, and the trial court ordered the issuance of a writ of execution. Now, Abacan moved to quash both the writs on the ground that the emancipation patents had already been issued in their favor during the pendency of the case. They argued that now being the owners of the relevant portions of the property, execution would thus become inequitable if they will still be ejected from the property. They argued that the subsequent acquisition of ownership is not a supervening event that will bar the execution of judgment in the unlawful detainer case. That was the contention of Holy Trinity. The Supreme Court ruled that the sole issue in ejectment cases is physical or material possession of property independent of any claim of ownership by the parties. The argument of Abacan that they subsequently acquired ownership cannot be considered as a supervening event that will bar the execution of the judgment, as unlawful detainer does not deal with the issue of ownership. Because the only issue in action interdictal is material possession. Okay, possession only, possession de facto. Okay, since possession de facto is the only issue, the mere fact that they became owners later of the subject property will not make execution inequitable. It does not alter the judge because action interdictal deals only with the issue of possession de facto. Tampican versus Ed. So in this case, an action for forcible entry was filed by Ludivina because of by Baroy against Ludivina because of the improvements introduced by Ludivina on the lot owned by Baroy. So the trial court ruled in favor of Baroy. The decision was affirmed by the RTC and it became final and executive. So it ordered the issuance of writs of possession and demolition. It is at this stage of the proceeding that petitioner moved to stay execution the decision on the ground of supervening events. Okay? The Supreme Court said that supervening events pertain to past after judgment has become facts. After judgment has become final and executory, or to new circumstances which develop after the judgment has acquired finality, including matters which the parties were not aware of prior to or during the trial as they were not yet in existence at that time. So to claim this exception again, there are two things that must be present. First, the fact or circumstance must occur after the judgment became final. And second, the fact or circumstance must be shown to affect or change the substance of the judgment, making execution ineffective. Petitioner raises two matters, a supervening. Okay, first, a prior forcible entry case between Bernal and Andrew had already settled the question of possession. And second, a town site sales application filed by Ludivina, which is at the final stage of the application process requiring a public bidding of the lot. The first requisite for a supervening event is not met. The fact alleged by the petitioner occurred before the judgment became final. Even if the petitioner had no knowledge of this development, this does not change the fact that the event is not a supervening one. Okay, because the fact that he is alleging as a supervening happened before the finality of the judgment. Okay, as to the second supervening event about the town site application, the RTC rejected that it was a supervening event because it was filed after the decision in the forcible entry case. And second, this occurred before the finality of the decision which enforcement she seeks to prevent. Okay, and also it must be mentioned that the only issue in a forcible entry case is physical possession, possession de facto. And the town site sales application pertains to ownership. Okay? We now move to the case of Gocolay versus Gocolay. So in this case, Michael filed with the RTC a petition for paternity. He wanted to be recognized as the biological and non-marital son of Miguel. Now, as proof, Michael presented his birth certificate, which named Miguel as his father and stated that Priscilla and Miguel were married. Now, in Miguel's answer, he denied having a child with Priscilla. He claimed that the statements in Michael's birth certificate regarding his father and Priscilla's marital status were falsified. Now, Michael also filed a motion for DNA testing, which Miguel opposed. Said motion was granted, and the decision became final. Now, subsequently, Miguel filed a motion to dismiss or to recall the order allowing the DNA testing, which has already attained finality. He alleged that there is a supervening event in that Priscilla has been charged and pled guilty for violating PD 651 for making false entries in Michael's birth certificate. Now, the issue is whether or not Priscilla's conviction for making false entries in Michael's certificate of live birth is a supervening event that warrants the setting aside of the final and executory RTC orders for DNA testing of Michael and Miguel. Okay? The Supreme Court ruled that this court does not consider to be a supervening event facts and circumstances that arose before judgment became final, but were only raised after. If the fact or circumstance did not materially change the party's situation and did not materially affect the execution of judgment, it cannot be considered as a supervening event. An instance would be the death of a party as they may be substituted by the heirs. In this case, the final and executory nature of the RTC's orders requiring the parties to undergo DNA testing is undisputed. Priscilla's conviction for violating PD 651 did not change the RTC's orders, which became final and executory. Okay? The Quezon City METC handed down its judgment of conviction on June 19, 2012. At that time, the petition in the Supreme Court had not yet been resolved with finality. This court only issued its resolution denying the petitioner's motion for recall 8 days after, or on June 27, 2012. So indeed, the entry of judgment for the Supreme Court petition was dated August 3, 2012. If petitioner was only vigilant in the vindication of his rights, he could have raised the existence of the pending case against Priscilla, but he did not. Petitioner failing to seasonably raise a defense that he could have raised at the earliest opportunity amounts to a waiver of that defense. And more importantly, Priscilla's conviction did not materially change the party's situation as to warrant recalling the order. The false entry in the respondent's birth certificate referred to Priscilla's claim that she was married to the petitioner. Marriage between respondent's parents is not indispensable to establish the identity of his putative father. It only affects his status, foreclosing the possibility that he could be a marital child, but leaving the door open to him being petitioner's non-marital child, in accordance with the definitions of legitimate and illegitimate children. Okay, we now move to the case of Maravilla versus Tupa. So if you will notice, all the previous cases uh, uh, do not establish the facts or circumstances alluded to as a supervening event. So in the case of Maravilla versus Tupas, the Supreme Court held that the subsequent decision classifying the island of Boracay as a forest land, okay, is a supervening event, okay, that made the enforcement of a decision, okay, in a civil case uh, concerning an unregistered land as inequitable. So in this case, petitioner's basis for their claim over the property is the decision that is the deed of sale, I mean, of unregistered land that the late Sosimo executed with the late Asiklo. Now, this deed of sale has been adjudged by the RTC to be binding between the parties, and the decision has already attained finality. So, this is a parcel of land in Malay Aklan, which is popularly known as Boracay. However, after the finality of the decision, the Supreme Court rendered a ruling in another case, Secretary of DNR versus Yap, that the entire island of Boracay is state-owned except for land covered by existing titles. Now, the issue is whether or not this court's decision in Secretary of DNR versus Yap can be considered as a supervening event, and whether or not such supervening event can prevent the execution of a judgment that has already attained finality. The island being owned by the state can only be made subject of private ownership by the government. Okay. As such, the CA was correct in ruling that uh, the property being state-owned, petitioner's claim of ownership over the subject property is negated. At the time of the sale, the subject property, the late Asiklo had no right to sell the property that has not been declared alienable by the state. Hence, he cannot pass unto another any right or title to own or possess the land. Therefore, the sale of unregistered land has become null and void because the subject property of the contract is a forest land and cannot be alienated at the time the deed of sale was executed. Contracts whose objects are outside the commerce of man are non-existent and void ab initio. As you have learned in property, forest land cannot be considered as subject to the commerce of man because it is a property of public dominion, and therefore it cannot be acquired through prescription. Accordingly, the court's decision in DNR versus Siap can be considered as a supervening event that can stay the execution of a judgment that has already attained finality. We now go to the modes of execution. Okay, once a judgment has already attained finality, it becomes immutable and execution becomes a matter of right. Now, there are two modes of execution. The first mode is by motion. Okay, you file a motion, the prevailing party files a motion for execution within 5 years from date of entry of judgment or final order. Second is by independent action through revival of judgment after the lapse of 5 years from the date of entry, but before it is barred by the statute of limitation. What is revival of judgment? It is a procedural means of securing the execution of a previous judgment which has become dormant after the passage of 5 years without its being executed upon motion of the prevailing party. It is not intended to reopen any issue affecting the merits of the judgment debtor's case, nor the propriety or correctness of the first judgment. What is the prescription for revival of judgment? It prescribes in 10 years counted from the finality of judgment. The finality of judgment is the same as the date of entry of the judgment. Okay? We go to Pineda versus Miranda. So in this case, Miranda filed a complaint for unlawful detainer against Pineda. Now, a decision was rendered in favor of the respondent. which was affirmed by the RTC on appeal. Now, on January 6, 2000, the respondents filed a motion for issuance of writ of execution, which was granted by the MPC on February 14, 2000. Now, on May 9, 2006, respondents filed a complaint for revival of judgment holding that the writ of execution issued on February 14, 2000 was not implemented within 5 years from the finality of the decision. Now, an action for revival of judgment is an action with the exclusive purpose of enforcing the judgment, which could no longer be enforced by a motion. So your cause of action is the judgment itself, the judgment that became final, but was not enforced or implemented. Okay, now in determining the prescription period for the filing of an action for revival of judgment, okay, we should consult Articles 1144 and 1152 of the Civil Code. Article 1144 states that the following actions must be brought within 10 years from the time the right of action accrued, and that is upon a judgment. So if your cause of action is based on a judgment, it must be filed within 10 years from the accrual of the right of action. Article 1152 also states that the period of prescription of actions to demand the fulfillment of obligation declared by a judgment commences from the time the judgment became final. So you count 10 years from finality of judgment. Okay? That is the prescriptive period for filing an action for revival of judgment. Both the rules of court and the civil code provisions relating to an action for revival of judgments are clear. Once a judgment becomes final and executory, the prevailing party has two remedies. First, to have the judgment executed as a matter of right by mere motion within 5 years from date of the entry of the judgment. Second option, if the prevailing party fails to have the judgment enforced by motion after the lapse of 5 years, to have the judgment enforced as a right of action by the institution of a complaint in a regular court within 10 years from the time the judgment became final. So the revival action is a new action altogether. It is different and distinct from the original judgment sought to be revived. It is a new and independent action wherein the cause of action is the decision itself and not the merits of the action upon which the judgment sought to be enforced is rendered. So the revival suit filed by the respondents did not intend to reopen any issue affecting the merits of the case or the propriety or correctness of the first judgment. Thus, the RTC decision can still be revived as the respondents properly filed a complaint for revival of judgment. Miranda versus Miranda. So in this case, petitioners filed with the RTC a complaint for annulment of title against the respondent. The RTC rendered a decision and petitioners did not file any appeal. Hence, the decision became final and executory. On December 11, 2001, the RTC issued a writ of execution which was not implemented. Now, the respondent filed with the RTC a petition for revival of judgment. The petitioners opposed the revival of judgment on the ground that the jurisdiction of the RTC to take cognizance of petitions for revival of judgment. Now, the issue is whether or not the RTC has exclusive original jurisdiction over an action for revival of judgment. Okay? The Supreme Court said a party aggrieved by a decision of a court in an action for revival of judgment may appeal the decision, but only insofar as the merits of the action for revival is concerned. The original judgment is already final and executory, may no longer be reversed, altered, or modified. So, as to whether or not an action for revival of judgment is subject to appeal, the answer is yes. But you're only appealing the decision in the revival of judgment itself, not the action, not the decision which is being revived. So in this case, petitioners assail the decision dated August 30, 1999, which is the original judgment sought to be revived or enforced. Considering that the said decision has already attained finality, petitioners may no longer question its correctness. Only the merits of the action for revival may be appealed, not the merits of the original judgment sought to be revived or enforced. As to whether the RTC has jurisdiction, the court affirmed it. An action for revival of judgment may be filed either in the same court where the judgment was rendered or in the place where the plaintiff or the defendant resides or in any other place designated by statute which treat the venue of actions in general. In fact, revival of judgment is an action which is incapable of pecuniary estimation. So it is the RTC which has exclusive original jurisdiction. Okay, we now go to the case of Kilo versus Bajau. In this case, the decision became final and executory on July 28, 2000. Bajau has 5 years or until July 28, 2005 to move for its execution. Bajau timely moved for execution of the decision when he filed a motion for execution on August 8, 2000. So it is only a few months after finality on July, to, a few days, I mean, after finality on July 28, 2000. The decision, despite the timely motion to execute the same, was not implemented by the court. The failure to implement the decision impelled Bajau to again file another motion for execution. However, Bajau's course of action to execute the decision is not in accordance with Section 6, Rule 39. Bajau merely filed a motion. As already stated, the correct remedy is to file a complaint for revival of judgment. Why? Because from the actions for revival of judgment, okay, the proper remedy is to file a complaint for revival of judgment. However, the circumstances are replete with peculiarities which impel this court to exercise its equity jurisdiction. So, he filed it timely, the motion for execution. However, it was not enforced within a period of 5 years. So both the filing of the motion and the enforcement or the issuance of the writ of execution must be done within the said 5 year period. Okay, otherwise, the court loses its jurisdiction to issue writs of execution through a mere motion. There has to be an independent action for revival of judgment has to be filed in order to enforce the same. Okay? Villarreal versus MWS. So in a decision dated October 30, 2000, the METC dismissed a case against Villarreal for unlawful detainer. So the decision, however, was reversed by the RTC in a decision dated September 27, 2002. Now, on December 15, 2002, the RTC issued an entry of judgment, okay, stating that the decision dated September 27 has become final and executory. So within a period of 2 years, or on May 17, 2004, MWSS filed a motion for writ of execution with the METC, which is the court of origin, the trial court. Now, more than 10 years from the filing of the MWSS motion for execution, or on July 28, 2014, the METC issued an order granting the motion for execution. So it was the 10-year period was very long. Okay? The motion was filed on May 17. The writ of execution was issued on July 28, 2014, more than 10 years. Now, the Supreme Court said that execution by motion is only available if the enforcement of the judgment was sought within 5 years from the date of its entry. This is a matter of right. On the other hand, execution by independent action is mandatory if the 5-year period for execution by motion had already elapsed. Okay, the said judgment is reduced to a right of action which must be enforced by the institution of a complaint. The action must be filed before it is barred by the statute of limitation, which is 10 years from finality. The date of entry is the same as the date of finality of the judgment. For execution by motion to be valid, the judgment creditor has to accomplish two acts within the 5-year prescriptive period. First is the filing of a motion for the issuance of writ of execution, and second is the court's actual issuance of the writ. Okay, so in this case, there is no dispute that the first requirement was accomplished because it was the motion for execution was filed within the 5-year period. However, there is non-compliance with the second requirement. The 5-year prescriptive period reckoned from the entry of judgment should be observed both by the winning party who filed the motion and the court that will resolve the same. The winning party may file the motion for execution within the 5-year period, and the court should issue the actual writ pursuant to the motion within the same period. After the lapse of the 5-year period, any writ issued by the court is null and void, since the court no longer has jurisdiction over the issuance of the writ. So reckon from the entry of judgment on December 15, 2002, more than 12 years have elapsed after the actual writ of execution was finally issued by the METC. By then, the METC was already stripped of its jurisdiction. Thus, the writ of execution it issued on October 26, 2015 is null and void. So there is a need to file a petition for revival of judgment. We now go to Section 7, execution in case of death of a party. So what if during the after the finality of judgment, but before its implementation, one of the party dies? So in case of death of the judgment obligee upon the application of his executor or administrator or successor in interest. In case of death of the judgment obligor against his executor or administrator or successor in interest, if the judgment is for the recovery of real or personal property or the enforcement of a lien. And third, in case of death of the judgment obligor, after execution is actually levied upon any of his property, the same may be sold to satisfy the judgment, and the officer making the sale shall account to the corresponding executor or administrator for any surplus. Okay, let us now go to stay of execution. How do you stay discretionary execution? Okay, discretionary execution may be stayed upon approval by the proper court of a sufficient supersedeas bond filed by the party against whom it is directed, conditioned upon the performance of the judgment or order allowed to be executed in case it shall finally be sustained in whole or in part. The bond thus given may be proceeded against on motion with notice to the surety. Okay, so the person who will file it is um, the prevailing party files the motion for discretionary execution in order for the defeated party or the opposing party to prevent the discretionary execution. He can file sufficient to proceed just one. Okay, there are actions which are immediately executory, okay, and are not stayed by appeal. Remember, under Section 4, judgments in actions for injunction, receivership, accounting, and support, and such other judgments which may be declared to be immediately executory shall be enforceable after their rendition and shall not be stayed by an appeal unless otherwise ordered by the trial. On appeal, the appellate court in its discretion may make an order suspending, modifying, restoring, or granting the injunction, receivership, accounting, or award of support. The stay of execution shall be upon such terms as to bond or otherwise may be considered proper for the security or protection of the rights of the adversary. Now, what if there is a reversal of a judgment which has already been executed? The Section 5 states that when the executed judgment is reversed totally or partially, or annulled on appeal or otherwise, the trial court may, on motion, issue orders of restitution or reparation of damages as equity and justice may warrant. So that is all for execution. Thank you for listening.